Okay, good evening everyone. I think we'll make a start. Welcome to you all on this glorious day. I think the decision to come here rather than to be outside, I hope is a reflection of the fantastic panel and important topic debate that we have this evening. I'm Jane Robinson. I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for engagement and place here at Newcastle University, and we're absolutely delighted to see you here for this debate, which is part of a series of events that the university is running linked to the government's 5 core missions. And today we will be focusing on that mission of growth, which some may argue is possibly one of the most important and significant missions that the government has identified. Just before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. Be grateful if you could put your phones on silent. But if you do want to share your thoughts or photos of this evening's event, please use the hashtag Newcastle Debates for social media. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the alarm does sound, please follow our stewards who will show you out of the building to the assembly point in the car park. So, this evening's debate, economic empowerment, how can we drive growth in the North East? And we're reflecting very much on the establishment of a North East Combined Authority for the North East, which is intended to be a step change towards reducing inequality and addressing the North-South divide. But the question is how that investment can be targeted to make a real difference, and how can we deliver inclusive growth in the region? Tonight, we are joined by a panel of experts who I will be introducing in a moment, and we'll be asking some of the questions that audience members have submitted in advance. But we are very keen to hear from the audience tonight, so we will be opening it up for questions and hopefully have an opportunity to have a full discussion. So, I shall be introducing our fantastic panel this evening. We're really pleased to have panellists with a broad range of experience from government, education, and policy here this evening, as well as business. Starting first of all with Andy Haldane, Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts and former Chief Economist of the Bank of England. Andy played a very influential role in terms of the development of the Levelling Up Bill and was Permanent Secretary for the Levelling Up at the Cabinet Office until March 2022. So we are delighted to have Andy, not least because he's also recently received an honorary degree from Newcastle University. You're very welcome, Andy.
Thank you.
Next we have Lucy Armstrong, who is Chair of the Port of Tyne and also Chief Executive of the Economist, which is a North East-based consultancy which helps businesses increase their development and success. Lucy has many hats, but I think for this evening her experience in terms of chairing Capital for Enterprise, which is involved in supporting over 4 billion of government-backed debt and equity support into businesses is particularly relevant, and also her role as chair of the CBI's National Small Business Forum. In terms of balance, I should probably also note that she's a former chair of Northumbria University, so all are welcome here. Moving on, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Kett. Paul is Senior Advisor and Global Director for Education and Skills at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and has a wealth of experience in education and skills systems. He was, until 2022, Director General for Skills at the UK Department for Education, and prior to that has held a number of different roles. He also has a connection with higher education as council member at the Open University. And then at the far end, very pleased to welcome Dr. Charlotte Carpenter. Charlotte is Director of Skills, Inclusion and Public Service Reform at the North East Combined Authority. That is a relatively recent appointment for Charlotte, and prior to that, she played a leading role as Executive Director of Growth and Business Development at Carbon Homes, having previously worked in a number of different roles in civil service and with the Regional Development Agency. I'm also pleased to say that Charlotte is a member of Newcastle University Court. So we have a theme from our panel members today and a huge range of experience. So without further ado, the format for this evening is, as I say, we're going to first of all turn to questions that have been submitted in advance, and then there will be an opportunity to open up. But I think if I can ask all of the panel to start off with, perhaps starting with Charlotte. I mentioned the fact that we now have a North East Mayoral Combined Authority here in the North East. And we hear from governments that the proposals around a devolution bill will increase the powers of those combined authorities. But want to ask the panel, from one of the questions from our audience, whether we are yet seeing the effects of devolution in the North East, or is it too early to tell? Charlotte.
Thank you. So by effects, I think that people are probably talking about impact on the ground in terms of people seeing the difference in their day-to-day lives and opportunities, because ultimately I think that is the true sort of proof of the pudding in relation to devolution. And to be fair, although we've announced a number of initiatives and they're sort of rolled out already, the Mayor's Opportunity Fund and a number of others, I think it's probably fair to say that by and large it's early days at the moment. One interesting thing, though, that I was told the other day by one of the business representative organisations is that the North East, in common with some of the other areas that are further down the road in devolution, is seeing an uptick in terms of business sentiment, so devolution dividend, as it were, in terms of business confidence within those areas. And I think that that's really interesting in terms of people's hopes and expectations for what we might be able to deliver through devolution.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, coming to you, interesting. You're based in London, so what's your perception?
Thank you, and yes, so I'm based in London. So I have the advantage of being able to give a bit of an outside perspective, but also the necessity to apologise for being a Londoner in this room. But I think what I would say is it absolutely is those early days. But one of the things I'm very struck by, not least in the conversations I have with some of my former colleagues who I used to work with in government, is the extent to which having that settlement gives the region a stronger voice. And although that will take time to kind of come through in terms of the impact, you can already see the kind of convening, and I think you see that in the business conference you referred to, that comes from having that combined authority is a real positive. So I think it's going to, the impact will be felt, yes, over time, but I think we're seeing the signs already that it will make a big difference.
Okay. And Lucy, your perspective?
So I think one of the issues is we've had a structural change, but have we had a cultural change? As someone who's lived here for 36 years, I absolutely voted no for the first time we had the chance to have a regional mayor. And the reason I voted no was I didn't think the quality of our local politicians were capable of delivering the kind of leadership. We've now had the structural change. What I'm pleased so far is that in the people that are engaged in political leadership at the moment, I have a sense of purpose, vision, mission, ambition, which is one of the things that I think has been massively missing in this region, and a willingness to listen and engage with others. And that, for me, is a huge change. So I am incredibly optimistic about where we are today. And if I think about the businesses that I work with in this region, I would concur with Charlotte. We are already seeing change. We are already seeing different kinds of conversations taking place. Of course, we haven't built anything yet. It's only been a year. Of course, we haven't suddenly grown the economy by 10%. It's only a year. but the quality of the conversations are completely and utterly different from the ones I have experienced in the whole of the 35 years I've lived here. Completely different. And for that reason, it's not a party political point, but for that reason, the structural change combined with the start of a cultural change means I am hugely optimistic on behalf of the whole of the region.
Interesting. And I think, Andy, I said in the introduction that you played a leading role in the development of the levelling up agenda. Is what you're seeing now kind of reflecting some of the ambitions that were set out in that bill?
Yes. Largely yes. I'll have the caveat at the end. So the larger yes would be leadership that's strong, that's singular, and that's strategic is all the difference in the world to anywhere. And the fruits of that, I think, are already visible in the conversations that you have. And indeed, in some projects, let's take Crown Studios in Sunderland, getting that over the line, a massive project at scale, of course, concrete not yet being poured, but that has the perspective to be, the potential to be totally transformative for somewhere like Sunderland. My one caveat around this would be we're still not doing Devo properly. It's still very modest and mealy-mouthed. I mean, the white paper from last year from the government spoke about a devolution revolution. That works as a piece of semantics. But substantively, it was a modest increment in extra spending powers with nothing really on the fiscal front to talk about. And that is basically half a loaf, half baked. And if Kim and Charlotte and friends are indeed to become masters of their own destiny, which I hope they do become, that will require a more wholehearted, full-throated approach to Devo than we've seen from any government so far.
May I come in on that? Sorry. So I totally agree with that. What I would say, though, is the picture within government is patchy, and it's patchy within government departments as well. Yeah. So we're getting the single settlement, so from September onwards we're able to sort of theoretically sort of operate as a sort of a single pot of investment fund that we're able to invest how we want. To what extent the reins will be off on that is unproven yet, and I think they partially will be and partially won't be. What I'm finding is that off the back of I think I agree with you, Lucy, around significant increased confidence within the region and very significant maturity in terms of collaboration to previously, and I think that then is snowballing in terms of the impact within central government and our ability to be able to successfully request additional devolutionary powers. You're right, though, I don't think it is always devolution, but we're having that open dialogue with central government and we're on an active journey with them.
Yeah, I think we need to seek forgiveness, not permission. Just go and grab it. That's what Burnham did, that's what Street did. Just go and do it. Talk about stuff that isn't in the agenda, isn't officially in your bailiwick, but you're living here, you've got people here, you've got views about how you want to organise your place, so start doing it, get a grip. And that, for me, is the bit that is starting to change here. A number of actors here, public, private and not-for-profit, but I'm really thrilled that the Mayor is one of those for the first time, is saying, this is my priority, this is what I'm going to talk about, this is what I'm going to focus on, and we just have to keep at it.
Okay.
Shy Ben's getting out.
Yeah, I think that should definitely be our strap line. I want to come back on this sort of question of inclusivity, which came through a number of questions from our audience, and I suppose the headline question is, when we talk about growth, particularly in a place like the North East, how can we ensure all parts of our economy are empowered by the work that we're doing? And maybe, if, Andy, just coming to you first on that question.
Well, I mean, Devo is a big part of that. But on this question of inclusivity, There's a spatial dimension of that, a geographic dimension of that. There's a socioeconomic dimension of that, rich versus poor. There's probably also a sectoral, third S, sectoral dimension of that. And I'd say on all three fronts, there's a lot of progress still needed. Growth by itself that does not lift the lives of the vast majority of people is not worth having. Right? Yeah. Growth to what end? If it's not lifting everyone's lives or a great... And the risk right now is that it isn't doing that sufficiently. I'll give a couple of examples just to make that point. I look at Rachel Reeves, Chancellor's speech. Huge amount of respect for Rachel on growth a couple of months ago. Wasn't very much in that for anyone that lives west of Oxford or north of Cambridge. And you might say, but Andy, you're forgetting her announcement about a new stadium for Manchester United. And I tell you that we all know most Man U supporters live in London anyway, right? So that's a bad example. We think socioeconomically. At the time of the spring statement a few weeks ago, this isn't me picking on Rachel, just happens to, she speaks to the growth agenda first and foremost. It was pointed out that by the end of this electoral term, the average person would be £500 better off, which wasn't the case for the previous government's electoral term. That's the good news. The bad news came out the next day when the Resolution Foundation said that wouldn't be true of the poorest 50% of the workforce. They'd be £500 worse off at the end of this electoral term rather than at the beginning. And that tells me we haven't yet quite got the balance right when it comes to growth that is spread spatially and is spread socioeconomically. And the truth is, this government, no government, has any hope of hitting a national growth mission unless pretty much every part of the UK is heading due north.
So I think one of the things that's fascinating, Charlotte, about your role is, you know, that sort of senior role within the Combined Authority, which is responsible for inclusion. So what's your sort of response to that challenge and that context that Andy said?
I totally agree with the context that Andy set. So within the North East, a fifth of all households are workless. That's a shocking number. It's significantly higher than the UK average. There's a moral imperative behind addressing that, but actually bigger than that, there's an economic imperative. You know, I always say that it's like as though within the North East we're trying to drive a car faster, but only on three wheels. And unless we address the significant issues that we've got with the economic inactivity and then the skills gaps within our region, so, you know, significant people who are underemployed or underskilled, not only to meet future needs, but to meet current needs, we're never going to achieve what we want to achieve as a region economically. So for me, I mean, there's two things that mean, you know, two of the big reasons I was really keen to join the North East Combined Authority, where it's mission focused, but the mission is focused on growing an economy that works for everyone. And then the other aspect was in developing the regional growth plan, which is the North East equivalent to the UK's industrial strategy. There's an explicit focus not only on the high growth sectors, but also on the foundational economy, which employs over 50% of the population within the North East. And actually, I think that this is, personally, my view is this is an area where I think the North East is leading the way, and some other areas. And actually, I think we should be influencing upwards towards central government in that respect.
Thank you. And I suppose kind of just picking up on another question that we've had, which sort of digs further into some of those, you know, whether you frame it as challenge or opportunity, but, you know, we have an ageing population. And I think that kind of question around when we talk about skills, are we talking about, you know, people coming through the education system, or actually how do we make sure that ageing workforce and that challenge of economic inactivity is something that we're addressing. But I'd be quite interested, Paul, just to get your perspective, particularly, I suppose, with your former hat on, but also your current hat as well.
No, well, indeed, and so just to sort of carry on pulling at the thread of the previous conversation as well. I mean, I think you talked in the introduction about the economic mission being the sort of the guiding one and the overarching one. I think that's right. But I don't think you have a conversation about the economic mission without a conversation about the opportunity mission. And I think that's really where that sort of inclusive growth piece comes together. So, and in particular, exactly the challenge you were describing in the Northeast, but actually if we don't successfully create the pathways to enable people to acquire high levels of skills, we end up in that sort of chicken and egg problem with the job creation, and the jobs won't come if the skills aren't there, and so on. So you've got to look at them together. And in a way, that's if you think of that as the pathways into employment, it's the same problem for the population in employment, or in the labour market, whether they're participating or not. And the thing that's really important to think about is, in the long term, the labour market is vastly most affected by the current adult working population. So 80% of the labour force of 2030 is already in the labour force, or should be. So, and then when you put that together with what is it that's causing people to not be active in the labour market, there's a set of issues around health and participation, but also those industries which are being most disrupted by technology change and where we're seeing jobs go are those which traditionally people with lower levels of skills are in. And so unless the response includes a real focus on upskilling those with lower skills in the adult population, we won't have inclusive growth. And I think that's the really important place to focus on. And I think that's a real challenge, because I think actually devolution or delegation or whatever that sort of package is, has given mayors a package of interventions in that space, but at a time where the funding has been in rapid decline since 2010. And so there's a real challenge of the kind of fiscal firepower. And I think this is back to Andy's point on, are we real about devolution without those fiscal levers? Well, I don't think we are, because you can't take those choices about where you really want to invest that revenue. So I think that's the big challenge.
But I think it's wrong to think that the public sector holds that responsibility to solve that problem. And I think one of the challenges we have in the Northeast is that too many private sector organisations are comfortable doing what they've been doing for years and years and years, and they don't invest in talented people who happen not to have a lot of formal skills. And if I just blow the port's trumpet for a moment, when I joined the port 7 years ago, not a single person used a digital tool in our workforce. Today, every single person uses a digital tool, and most of those people were with us 7 years ago. They were all using a mobile phone 7 years ago at home, so they know how to do it, but their employer was not thinking that they had bright, capable brains. One of my mantras at the port has been, we have 324 brains. I want all of them to come to work. I want all of them to be used at work. And I see it as the responsibility of the leadership of organisations, public, private and not-for-profit, to invest in that. But that means you have to have ambition to want your business or your organisation to thrive and grow. And an awful lot of people in the private sector aren't interested in growth. And they're not interested in growth in this region and haven't been for a very long time. And I lament the fact that we constantly just look at the public sector for the solution, instead of actually galvanising the private sector that does exist, or indeed the not-for-profit sector, which can be just as creative and ambitious. And that's one of the changes we're just starting to see happen here now.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think it's not unique to the Northeast. It is a problem across the country, particularly of business investment in the workforce. And actually, so compared to comparators in the EU, we spend significantly less as employers in investing in our workforce and that improved productivity that comes from it. But what we do spend we tend to spend on already highly skilled
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something about really focusing that
Yeah.
employer conversation on how we're really pulling people through. And I love your port example, that's fantastic. But that is absolutely the exception, not the norm, and
Yeah.
that's the challenge.
I think it's actually, I don't think it's only about pulling people through, I think it's about pulling people in. So, yes, you're right, it is a national problem, but actually Northeast rates of business
We're worse.
investment are,
Yeah.
are low.
Yeah.
They're lower than the UK average. It might even be the lowest. You probably know the figure better than I do, Lucy. But you know, we've also got an issue. There's a significant gap in terms of employers' perceptions of what makes someone job ready for an entry-level job, and what colleges will say in terms of, you know, their ability to how, you know, where they can get someone to in terms of readiness to work. And I do think that, I mean, I absolutely think you're right. I think that there's an obligation in a number of respects that we need to be putting on the business sector and employers generally, not only to invest more, to pull more people through, but actually to be creating more entry-level jobs and be willing to put more time and money and investment into supporting people who are just entering the workplace, particularly those from disadvantaged or underrepresented backgrounds.
And I would suggest that one of the intelligent ways in which some organisations, public, private and not-for-profit, are doing that is recognising that actually in an environment where skills and requirements are changing so fast, what you need to recruit for is aptitude and values and behaviours, not bits of paper, not certificates that say you know how to knit yogurt. And because you can't, it's really hard to teach people values and behaviours. It's very easy to teach someone how to use a new piece of equipment, or teach them some software, or teach them a language. It really, really is, particularly if they're motivated to do it because you value them because they're in your organisation.
And does that, I'm just envisaging a next module on knitting yogurt, but you know, Charlotte talked about the FE sector, and I think what we're hearing from the panel in response to this sort of challenge is that, you know, the sort of that skills ecosystem has got to be a collaboration between a whole range of different players, both national government, devolved authorities, businesses. But what role do education providers play in that? Andy?
Has to be a big one. I mean, let's take a case in point. And people like me, you know, aridly talk about the economically inactive, or the NEETs. Those not in education, training or employment, and how that imposes some deadweight cost on the economy. But is it not a moral outrage that we have 1 million 18 to 24-year-olds who are NEETs, which, by the way, means in plain language they've been othered by the system, right? They're no longer in our system, neither learning nor earning or any part of it. At age 18 to 24, right? Just getting started. So whatever the growth benefits of bringing the 1 million people on the first rung of the ladder, or the 9.5 million that exist across the workforce generally, don't lose a degree of moral outrage at that. Because it is outrageous that we're letting that number of people down that early in their lives. So they've stepped away from all of our systems. If they are to step back, what will that require? It will require all moving parts of the system to change what they've done in the past, right? And that absolutely includes government and what it does in terms of skills provision. It absolutely includes business. Inherently, whatever they tell you, will shy away from people over the age of 50 that have health problems, whether mental or physical, that require special conditions to work well. They will move away from people, and they have. That is discrimination in all bar name. Until that changes, till the demand side of the equation changes, this is all for the birds, right? The other two parts of this, though, are one, learning institutions, and they're many in various forms, FE, HE, colleges across the piece, And it also includes, I think, vast parts of civil society. So if you think you were going to reach those 1 million 18 to 24-year-olds with an upgraded job centre, good luck with that one, right? That's the system they've stepped away from.
Yeah.
Reaching those that are furthest from learning and earning will require different sorts of connective tissue. And while there's no one singular solution to that, civil society in its many and various forms is engaging with those most distant from work and learning and have to be part of the solution, I think, to this problem. In the spring statement, the government set aside what on the face of it sounds like a decent amount of money for employment support programs to get people back into either training or to work. Actually, £1 billion spread across 9.5 million people is not very much money at all, point one. And point two, if that £1 billion is indeed deployed through upgraded job centres, that will see very few people flow back into a system from which they feel they have been rejected.
Can I just add, I think that there's two sides to this as well. There's the, if you like, there's the curative bit we need to do for the problem we're in, and then there's the preventative bit to stop it occurring again. And again, if I just give you some examples from the port, within 200 yards of our northern operations in North Tyneside, there is a housing estate where there are children who don't know we have a river, who have never been to the centre of Newcastle. Just let that sink in for a moment. I know because one of my godsons is a teacher there, and as a result, the port now sends a number of our colleagues go and listen to those children read, and we've taken them around the port, and we've taken them on the river, simply to make their world bigger. That is enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. When those kids are teenagers, if they haven't started already, they will start breaking through our fences. We've had 4 people intruding in the last 24 hours through our security fence. That's a border post for the UK. So talking to them when they're 5 and 6 at school hopefully will prevent some of that. Enlightened self-interest. Very selfish, but enlightened self-interest. They're also my future workforce. They're right by, so they could walk to work. We could have some really interesting jobs for them in 15, 20 years' time. I don't know what those jobs will be, but we will still be here as a port almost certainly at that point. Enlightened self-interest. I want them growing up seeing the port as a potential employer for them for when they're grown up. And I want their parents to see that that is possible. So there's an element of curative for the, and I agree with you, I have moral outrage about this too. And there's something about all organisations, and I would argue all adults, doing something in their lives to prevent this from happening to the next generation. And don't subcontract it out to civil servants or politicians. Do something. Do something. I'm lucky in that at the port I've got the ability to wield some slightly larger levers, but in your own private life, you can go and listen to a kid reading at school, you can go and do something. It's enlightened self-interest. If you want a better society, you have to create it. And you have to work. You have to work at it.
So I think we've heard quite a lot of sort of focus on I think what Andy, you described civil society, and one of the questions from our audience was around the role of social enterprises, and I suppose one of the kind of challenges in the sort of fiscal environment we have is that for many of those social enterprises, the capacity and resource that they've had, and for the wider community and voluntary sector, is really, really challenged. And in a sort of national environment where we have Treasury Green Book appraisals that don't necessarily measure some of the things that we've been talking about. I'm just interested in the panel's reflections on what role that sort of wider, and how do you facilitate that wider civil society, social enterprise, and community and voluntary sector. I'm going to be really mean and pick on Paul as a former civil servant, because one of the challenges, I think, is that kind of sense of a national sort of policy context against some of these very local challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its heart, it comes back to the case for devolution. At the point at which you're trying to solve for those grassroots problems from a building, I'm going to say in Whitehall, of course Whitehall is more distributed around the country than it once was, but you're never going to achieve that. And I think there's something about I think what policymakers in central government can do, in addition to devolution, is think about how do you create the policy frameworks which have flexibility within them. And I think that's a really important part of it. And certainly when I was at the Department for Education, we spent a lot of time trying to think about how as we were making policy, were we involving people right down at the coalface in understanding what those implications would be, such that you could build more flexibility in to respond to local circumstances. But fundamentally, I come back to where I start on devolution, is you are more likely to create those conditions closer to the communities within which those actors in civil society exist if you have the right level of devolution. But I think that the second thing I wanted to say was going back actually to your original part of your question, Jane, which was, I think, around the sort of respective roles and responsibilities of employers, education, training providers, and civil society. And I think, in a way, we've ended up in a sort of position where we've sort of put quite a lot of strictures and expectations on those as being quite binary. And so employers chuck the requirement to education providers. Education providers go away and write a detailed curriculum and then provide it, and civil society probably doesn't get a look in that kind of conversation. So there's something for me about actually how do you, try and drive some sort of greater simplification and flexibility into the system. And I think that's particularly, if you take the college system, actually one of the experiments that was done as a result of devolution in London, the GLA used their funding to give 5% of their budget to colleges without any strings attached to it to better meet community education needs. So those kind of examples I think are really interesting. And then secondly, how do you ensure that the relationship between the business and education and training provider is an ongoing dialogue, and one where instead of what I would often describe as employers saying, I want this perfectly jigsaw-shaped person popping out of the education system, working out actually what's the sort of the age 2+ jigsaw piece rather than the adult jigsaw piece, and then thinking about what is the relationship with the employer in providing the sort of the specificity that needs to go around the edge. And I see examples of this where colleges and universities and employers work together, bringing in experts from the employers to teach on those courses to provide that sort of rounding out. So I think there's something about just putting some more space into the system to allow that flexibility at its heart.
And Charlotte, does devolution give that space, do you think? Are the levers there to have that more system collaborative approach?
Some of them are, yeah, definitely. I mean, social enterprises are diverse. They go from sort of really, really small organisations to quite large organisations. So my previous world prior to this was Housing Association. We were social enterprise. We employed about 1,000 people. And you'll have bigger social enterprises like that within the region. So they're a significant part of our business base. That's reflected in the fact that the cabinet, NECA's cabinet, is comprised of our 7 local authority leaders, a representative of the business sector, and I won't embarrass him, but he's in this room, a representative of the voluntary, community and social enterprise sector as well. What I've seen through my housing experiences is the really crucial role that social enterprises can play on the ground in knitting everything together on a place-based basis. So to bring some sort of specific examples and some colour to that, We've got a very significant trailblazer devolution deal from DWP at the moment to tackle economic inactivity. And one of the conversations that I was having with DWP the other day was they said to me about their own job centres, actually, we don't necessarily always get the people who are economically active walking into our job centres to start off with. We know that your social enterprises and organisations like housing associations have got a much stronger relationship with those individuals, and they're right. And what we also found when I was working in my previous employer was that actually we often have much stronger organisations with the small businesses, which are more likely to offer the flexibility needed to be able to tailor entry-level jobs or placement support. So that is the sort of thing that we're thinking about as NECA when we're taking part of what we're thinking about when we're taking forward our pilots and trailblazer deals with DWP.
And I think that hits on an important point. By the way, the port is a social enterprise. It's a trust.
There you go.
I don't have any shareholders. I don't distribute profits. So I think we have to be really careful about what we mean by social enterprise. I would argue, and if you look at the Companies Act, any private company has a whole set of duties to broader society, to the environment, to its employees, to the community, as well as to its shareholders. So I think some of this is a false structural divide between different types of organisations, which I think is unhelpful. But I think what Charlotte's hit upon is an opportunity for the North East, and it's one that I sense that that we're starting to take, which is offer to be the guinea pig, offer to be the lab rat, offer to be the place in the United Kingdom to experiment. We're small. We're a long way from the centre of power. Nobody cares whether we succeed or fail. We've got urban, we've got rural, we've got great universities, we've got every single pretty much economic sector, but there's only 2.5 million of us. We're a brilliant microcosm of the UK. Our special place is to be the lab rat for all of this kind of experimentation at a local level, a regional level, and then feed those ideas in. Add value to the UK by saying this works, this didn't work so well. We're also small enough that we all know one another, and therefore we can learn really quickly and be honest with one another and say that experiment hasn't really worked, has it? Let's ditch that one. But this one over here, that has. And I think that is our real golden opportunity at the moment, and one that kind of initiative, having the combined authority, allows that bit of government to convene, to catalyse, to facilitate, not control, not powerful, not with a budget, but to enable. And that, I think, is the bit that we really should seize upon and we should all celebrate and join in.
So I think really interesting sort of concept and proposition. You heard it here first that one of the distinctive things about the North East is our ability to offer to be that place where there's new innovation and new things tried. One of the challenges often in kind of the debate around economic growth is the sort of trade-off between what one might describe as high growth sectors and distinctiveness of where we have what people might describe as world-leading strengths or capacity. And one of the challenges you often hear is everywhere wants to be the same, everywhere wants to be good at these things, and we have to pick some areas. Really interested in the panel's reflection on, how do you get that balance right? And what would be the things that you would identify as the distinctive strengths of the North East? And Andy, I'm going to ask you this because I've heard you talk about this before.
Oh, gracious. Good.
What did you say?
What did I say?
He's desperately trying to remember.
Anything that has any hope of calling itself a strategy involves making choices. It involves picking and sticking. And among the reasons why I think we've struggled on the growth front, historically, among the reasons is because we haven't been picking and sticking. We've been spraying and praying, which is the wrong way to do it. Spreading the jam thinly. So knowing what you're good at and winning your winners is important. And to some extent, in the Green Paper, the government published industrial strategy at the end of last year. It set out its early thinking on who the winning sectors might be. Those places where legitimately the UK could be said to have a comparative advantage over other countries around the world. 8 of those sectors well represented across the northeast, luckily. Is that the entirety of it, though? It cannot be. It cannot be, because for many parts of the UK, including, Charlotte should correct me on this, including, I would say, here, those 8 sectors would leave most of the workforce behind.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, say in the East Midlands, where we're doing some work at the moment, those 8 sectors cover 15% of the workforce. So what's the story? What's the proposition for the remaining 85% in what Charlotte called earlier on the foundational economy? The bulk buyers when it comes to the jobs market, retail, wholesale, distribution, construction, hospitality, and the like. Unless there is a proposition for those sectors, an offering, an investment, you have no hope of both growth being inclusive, but indeed growth at all. So when I took the final part of your question, Jane, then, where would we look here in the northeast for areas of real strength? Let me mention a couple of areas of real strength, and then one of huge opportunity. The 2 areas of real strength, and others will speak to others, would be around all matters sports, creative and cultural. Huge asset up here, something that UK does fantastically, right? The Premier League, like it or not, is the Premier League in the whole world, not just in England. And we should not overlook that incredible asset. The World Snooker Championship, going on currently, in Sheffield, is the World Championship, is the pivotal thing. And Barry Hearn wanted to hawk it round the planet is not good for UK PLC longer term. So that'd be one area. I could go on, as could others, much better than me, about the amazing creative and cultural and sporting strengths of this region. A second, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here with Chris and Jane in the audience, is you have an amazing set of HE institutions. And the fact that you do have Newcastle, obviously, but Durham and Northumbria and Sunderland, in some ways, is a fantastic set, spanning the space right from frontier innovation and research of the type that this university does spectacularly well, right through to more vocational, foundational aspects in Northumbria and Sunderland. And that is a huge asset. And not to win that winner would be a tragedy for the country and for the region. The opportunity, I think, is, and we touched upon it earlier on, and Charlotte mentioned the shocking numbers of people, young people, and let's name them, often young, white, working class boys. What Gareth Southgate in his Dimbleby lecture a few weeks ago called the lost boys. Lost to the system. If we have not got a story that speaks to them and you're finding those that are lost so early in life, we are letting ourselves down. And I think through Devo, you can absolutely blaze a trail on this, Charlotte, in being innovative in a way that we all know Whitehall otherwise can find difficult. And indeed, joining the dots between sectors and between policies that Whitehall also finds difficult. And that's not a criticism. There's no better civil servant than Paul, right?
Well, he's not one anymore.
There's no better ex-civil servant than Paul. But with the best will in the world, the joining of the dots between Whitehall is fantastically difficult.
Yeah.
It is possible at the local level, and that's among the great virtues.
Paul, do you want to come in as
I
an
do
ex-civil
actually,
servant?
not on the civil service point, though I do agree with that, and I think there's something about the very structures of government which get in the way of that, which is part of the challenge. But I wanted to really pick up the point on the number and the strength of higher education in the region, and indeed the college system and the wider tertiary system. 2 points. So firstly, if you want to understand the kind of a fantastic indicator of what is an area that is going to have stronger economic growth, look at the concentration of the universities. And this is a global phenomenon. If you've got a higher concentration of universities, you will have higher GDP growth. And so you've got a fantastic concentration here. And so the question is, how do you leverage that? And I think, as Andy was articulating, a strategy isn't a strategy unless you're making some choices. It's easier to make those choices, I think, at a local level than it is at a national level. And I have hopes for the government's industrial strategy when it comes, but I think it will still be quite broad. But the ability to make some of those decisions at a local level. But then the power is not that the combined authority has that strategy. The power is the collaboration with the universities and thinking about where is it that the research strengths, and not just for spin-outs, but actually to think about the collaborations with industry in those areas. And indeed, I published a report with Lloyds Banking Group and PwC colleagues back end of last year, where we talk about some of the examples of where universities and the private sector comes together. And Newcastle was one of our case studies as part of that. But unless you're kind of doing that very intentionally against that sort of purpose, the activity of the university is not necessarily aligned to the wider ecosystem. And I think that's the big opportunity with devolution. It's not just the governance structures, it's how the other anchor institutions come together in support of that strategy. And I think that's the real opportunity and something to not spare Jane's blushes. Jane has been absolutely integral to in this region, is actually how do we get the universities coming together to do this.
And I'm taking away a few phrases from this evening's debate, and spraying and praying is one of them. But Charlotte, how's the combined authority, given some of the challenges of kind of political representation across the region? How do you, how as a combined authority do you see that ability to avoid, to have a strategy where there is a kind of sense of choice to try and support economic growth?
So, I'd be lying if I said that it was always easy, but I go back to where we started the debate and Lucy saying where she saw this region now versus 30 years ago, and where I came to the North East in 2001. I was working for the Regional Development Agency at the time, One North East, and the approach now is very different, and part of that is because there's an increased regional maturity, and I think that the interim local growth plan that has been published by NECA is very significantly different from the regional economic development strategies, one of which I led back 20 years ago, whenever it was. And part of that reason is because actually the region has been able to coalesce around a smaller number of priorities, and we are much clearer about some of the areas in which, to go back to your previous question, Jane, the region was the region truly is a leader on. So renewables and offshore wind, advanced manufacturing and automotive. And I think that with that political maturity comes an understanding that some of those sectors are going to play to the geographical strengths of some of our local authority areas. But actually, the sort of the spatial geography of the North East is one that is dependent on each other.
Yeah.
So an individual local authority area will know that its success depends on the success of the surrounding local authorities as well, in terms of being able to create the job opportunities or provide the workforce and so forth. So there's a sense of us having to act together, and each local authority playing to the particular strengths and opportunities that it's got, alongside key actors. So, you know, we've talked here about the role of the universities in that, and I think that's particularly important if you're thinking about things like how can innovation from universities support things like offshore wind, but actually also in relation to, we've got a strength in the public sector within here, this economy, we've got a strength within health and social care. So again, and that's, you know, back to foundational economy, a lot of sort of, you know, quite entry-level jobs. And here again, the university, and you know this better than anyone, Jane, is playing a key role in things like Centre for Healthy Ageing and Vitality. So I think that it's, you know, how can we all be working together to knit together those opportunities?
So it's interesting that you mentioned the public sector, because we do, and I'm going to sort of draw these questions and come to the audience shortly. So if you have start formulating your questions now. So, but we did have a question around the public sector, and we haven't talked that much about the role of the public sector in growth. And the question's around how can public sector institutions in the North East model bold experimentation to become active economic accelerators? And the question is, rather than passive enablers, and are there government reforms that could actually facilitate that change? So the role, I mean, we have a high proportion of employment in the public sector in this region. That's often described as a weakness. Some may say it is an opportunity. So reflections from the panel on that. Lucy.
I'm not sure we do have an outsized public sector. We have an under-ambitious private sector. But if you look at the numbers, actually the public sector here is not that much bigger than in other regions. So that's the first point I've made. The second one is building on Charlotte's point is, I think we made the Balkans look like a picnic for the last, all the time I've lived here. And football notwithstanding, that's actually what's held us back massively. Because we as citizens of the North East, we don't see those boundaries. We live in North Tyneside and we go to work in South Tyneside. We live in Newcastle and we go to the beach in North Tyneside. And we live in Durham and we go to work in Newcastle and Gateshead. I know that at the Glasshouse, for example, on the doors for the artists, it says, "Remember, you are in Gateshead," so that when they step onto the stage. In Jane's former life, I remember having an argument with Jane about that. In my view, I get into a cab in London, and if somebody, I say I come from the North East, if they start talking to me about Sunderland, I start talking about great things in Sunderland. If they start talking to me about Durham, I talk about great things in Durham. I don't argue the toss that I actually live in Newcastle. And I think that's one of the biggest changes we have to still really cement and really get on with. And going back to the other bit that Charlotte was talking about, the foundational economy part, I think institutions, public sector institutions, are already engaging heavily in trying to be more experimental, but it has to be under the radar because you've got all these rules about where every penny of taxpayers' money goes. And that's right in a democracy. But that's where I've come back to us as a living lab. If you get the odd bit of budget at the side that you can experiment with, you can do that far more effectively here than perhaps you can elsewhere. And where I would argue elements of the public sector here have been stunningly successful is probably health. You can come here as an 18-year-old and train in a health profession, and you can have an absolute world-class career without ever leaving the North East. You could be a research medic, you can be a practitioner, you can be a teacher, you can do anything without leaving it. We've got lots of sick people to look after. We've got some amazing universities and some amazing hospitals. That is not the case for almost any other sector. So there's one bit of our public sector that I think is absolutely outstanding, and maybe there's something there to learn about how you go on that journey all the way through. And particularly now that you don't physically have to move necessarily to get experience from elsewhere, you can do it on screen, not exclusively, but there's elements of that. I think public sector organisations can be much bolder, perhaps, in the way they paint pathways for their own people to develop. And actually, the civil service in London is brilliant at this. I had lunch the other day with the retiring head of maritime in the Department of Transport. She started life working in a job centre, age 16, and she finished